because spiritual practice
Mm,
nourishes and fills us. When we meditate, when we do our yoga practice, when we pray, when we read wisdom texts that remind us of our true nature, when
mm.
we listen to a podcast that actually is speaking a language of the soul that nurtures us, and then we can come back into our life with the day-to-day stuff that needs to get done, which isn't always glamorous, and recognize that life, living in your life is a spiritual practice.
Welcome to the Wisdom We Share podcast, where ancient truths and modern intelligence weave together to inspire, ground, and shape us for a wiser, awakened life. I'm Anjani Amriit.
And I'm Robin Wald. And together we bring you fascinating conversations from the worlds of spirituality, science, and human behavior so you can connect to your own inner wisdom, joy, and clarity, elevating the way you actually live your life.
So, Robin, we had Matthew on the podcast a few weeks ago, and I have to say, he kind of blew my mind. He was just all over it, all over life, full of life, larger than life. And I thought we might just talk about some of the topics that he raised, bring our perspectives to them, and just really react and respond to what we talked about because we didn't really get time. So, can we do that today?
I would love that. I would love
Okay,
that. He had so many great, like, mind-blowing pieces of wisdom and experience to share. So I would love to go a little deeper.
great. So, let's first talk about trauma as a catalyst for personal growth. So, he talked about
Mm,
how his early life challenges with his mom growing up and how that really drove resilience, but also his discipline. And I have to say, his discipline is like a 5 million out of 10, and transforming his pain into something purposeful. And he's not
mm.
done that once, he's done it many times with different areas of his life. And so, what were your takeaways from that around transforming pain into purpose and how our early challenges might drive our
Mm.
discipline, our focus, resilience later on in life?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. So what comes up for me is, I have a lot of clients who are all different kinds of backgrounds and varied experiences, and some of them have just absolutely horrific traumas in their childhood. Early death of a parent, abandonment, child of alcoholics or addicts, sexual abuse, loss, like a sibling dying young. Like there's so many things that can really just adversely forever change your life. Um, and I'll say that not everybody turns that trauma into resilience, right? Some people are always pulled back and burdened and really suffer and struggle. And then I have clients who very much like Matthew, and I want to add to this that my youngest son is someone like this, who their greatest teacher in life is when they hit those rock bottom traumatic moments. So some people learn and grow what I call like transformation light. You know, like there are great ways to grow and transform through amazing experiences or through like the ordinary challenges that life has to offer you, minor crises. And then there are people who do transformation deep, dark, the dark night of the soul where you are in your own personal hell and don't know if you'll ever claw your way back out. And then you do. And that change alters who you are and how you see life and how you interact with life forever. Um, as a mother, I hate to see that my son does transformation heavy, but I've accepted that that's actually part of his wiring and his journey, the way he learns best, the way and like Matthew's story, right? It's, okay, this is going to make me bigger, better, stronger, more purposeful than ever before. So I don't know, what's your takeaway from that?
I have to agree with you that um, some of us do transformation light and some of us do it dark and heavy. I'm definitely on the dark and heavy side. I would say my ego would never have chosen that, but my soul definitely chose that.
Mm,
And I think it's like fairground rides, you know. Some people like to go on the big, wild, crazy rides and have the big experiences, and others are happy on, you know, the little cups that spin around. And I don't think you can compare them. I just think they're different horses for different courses. I can from my own experience and, you know, through the clients I mentor, I can say that I wholeheartedly agree with what you said, that sometimes we don't have to go really deep and dark to get learning, growth, and evolution. But if we do, there's a really wonderful saying in spiritual terms is that the deeper you go, the more uplift you get. So, in other words, you know,
mhm,
the deeper and darker you go into the underworld, then the more light you can bring once you've mastered the darkness, you can actually bring more light into the world. I think also there's an important balance that we need to get
mhm,
and bring to our lives, especially if we're the transformation deep people, that we don't get addicted to that
mhm,
as a way of life, that we actually are able to bring more light into our life so that ultimately our life becomes lighter. So we're not always having to go so dark and so deep, and that we
yeah,
get really masterful in churning through whatever comes through in our life and recognizing it. Oh, here's another dark night of the soul, or here's another test for me.
mhm,
Here's a universal exam that I need to pass. And so, what do I need to look at? And get really good at looking inward and assessing for ourselves, what's the driver here? What's the driver? Is it my wounding? Or is it something that's calling me to a higher purpose? You know, do I need to
mhm,
heal some old wounds and that lead me to my purpose, or do I need to take this pain and and really alchemize it into something that's going to
mhm.
help me, but also help each other, help other people
Yeah,
in my life.
yeah, yeah. Just one quick astrological follow-up on this conversation is that in the astrology chart, Pluto represents where and through what experiences you're going to be doing your transformation and how your soul is evolving and becoming in this life journey. And, Pluto is a very slow-moving planet. It could take 12 to 20 years to go through a sign. So it's not, it's more generational. It's like an outer transpersonal planet. But where it's relevant in your particular life and chart is what house is it in, because that's going to show you the types of experiences where you will experience pain, crisis, issues of power and lack of power, victimization, all of these things that take you into a darker place that force you or are inviting you to do that transformational work. So, someone who has Pluto in their first house, they might always be struggling with themselves and their identity and maybe with their body, first house. Pluto in the sixth house might always be struggling with day-to-day schedules and routines and work and physical health. Personally, I have Pluto in my seventh house, so my deepest transformational experiences have always happened in very close, intimate relationship. Whether that's lovership or close friends or like, but one-on-one relationship has often brought me to a place of deep pain and, you know, really confronting the darkest things in myself and in others and having to pull myself back up and find resilience. I don't know, do you know where Pluto is in your chart?
Not off the top of my head in Western. Is it Pluto or
Hmm.
Jupiter?
Pluto.
Pluto. Okay.
Pluto.
Mm.
Oh, you have, I'm looking at your chart. You have Pluto in the 29th degree and 18 minutes of Virgo. And I also have Pluto in Virgo. I'm a little younger than you, just by a year, but mine is a little
Just one
earlier
year.
in Virgo. But guess where your Pluto is? Also by Western astrology, also in the seventh house. We share that.
Wow,
Yeah.
it's so interesting.
Seventh house Pluto.
Yeah. Wow.
Hmm. Yeah.
So good to know. And I would say on that, from a perspective of self-realization and the process of self-realization, what house Pluto is showing you where the grist for the mill is in your life, where areas are an opportunity for you to grow and evolve and become more self-realized. So,
Yeah.
yes, it's
But
going to be a chunky.
also to come into your own power.
Yeah, well, that's
Yeah.
self-realization is
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
master oneself. So
Mm,
that's where the opportunity is to discover your greatest power, your greatest purpose, your highest purpose, your greatest expression of your soul. And so it can be bittersweet, but it's wonderful once that you have the revelations, the realizations.
mm.
So
Right. So going back to the interview with Matthew, he's
mm,
someone who really has spent a life journey mastering and coming into discipline as a result of those experiences.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm working through a lot of resilience, as he does that. So yeah, so the second thing we talked about with Matthew was um, healing through physical challenges. So using physical challenges, and he was sharing how he was doing all this really cold water, open water swimming as emotional and spiritual healing tools, looking at injury and recovery as transformative experiences.
Mm, yeah. Well, I mean, in my personal experience, I've suffered with a lot of injuries. So I have an autoimmune condition, and it results in a lot of kind of unseen health issues that I deal with all the time, including chronic pain and chronic inflammation. But I also have a tendency to have connective tissue tears. And I have, actively right now, like 5 tears in my body, in an elbow, in a shoulder, in hands, in a knee. And so I'm always in some state of physical limitation and rehab around my body. So trying to protect and preserve my body while also pushing me to the limits of what I can do, while also being mindful and cautious not to injure. So, right. And people have different physical, um, stuff, but what would I say to that? I realized at one point I had dislocated an elbow and I had torn ligaments in the elbow, and the elbow got really weak, and I was really deep into my yoga practice at that time. I was teaching yoga, I was practicing very strong advanced level yoga, like 3, 4 days a week, and with the elbow I couldn't. And I got really limited and really weak, and a little bit of the boohoo, woe is me. This is so frustrating, right?
We've all been
We were
there.
we're allowed to do that and to feel
We
our
are.
limitation as a sadness or as a loss, right? To mourn and grieve for what you no longer have the ability to do,
Mm,
which was something that was life-giving and joyful.
mm,
Ultimately, though, I spent a year rehab, avoiding, whatever. And ultimately, I said, you know what? This hurts and isn't fully healed, whether I do yoga or don't do yoga. I'm just going to start doing yoga again. Because either way, if I'm in pain, I'd rather be in pain and do what I love than be in pain and not do what I love. So that was for me a kind of like an FU to my physical limitation, and to say, I can tolerate pain. I'm tolerating it anyway. Let me just continue to just go forward. And I think that through that, I actually became stronger, and it did ultimately heal, and things take time.
mm,
Um, but
mm,
similar with my knee, I blew out my ACL and I couldn't really hike. Or do certain things that I really love for about a good year. And now I'm back to it. And it's not as strong as it was and it's not as stable as it was, but I'm not going to give up hiking. I'm
mm,
going hiking this weekend, and I'm like, I can't wait. I can bring it, bring the elevation, bring the uphill, downhill. Now I use poles. It's an adaptation.
mm.
And as a yoga teacher, obviously people have all kinds of injuries, and it's very much about learning to master what do I need to adapt to support myself and, care for myself. But it's not about giving up or avoiding or, like, how can I make this work? How can I work with
Yeah,
this?
yeah.
Yeah.
For me, I think pain, there's nothing like pain to bring us to the present moment. Because
Mm,
otherwise we just get on with our life and we're doing things and pushing ourselves and doing and being active and in kind of that autopilot mode. But then if pain comes along, oh geez, it stops us in our tracks. We can't ignore it. That initial rush of pain, that if you break a bone, I broke my wrist. If you have that pain, then it makes you look at it. It makes you consider what's going on here. It forces us to be fully present with our physical body. And for me personally, it's when I've had pain in the past, it's forced me to grow wisdom in that area of my life. So
Mm,
learning Ayurvedic medicine when I had irritable bowel helped me help my body to recover fully from that when the doctors said you'll always have it for the rest of your life.
mm-hmm.
And so for me, it's about learning about what our body needs and being kind
Yeah.
and gentle to our body, and our body bringing us into the present moment so that we can focus on it. So, it's an interesting one. And I think there are two lovely perspectives that for our listeners, hopefully we'll get some interest and some motivation, maybe some inspiration and guidance for. And then finally, we talked about parenting as a spiritual journey and how parenthood can often force personal growth and our sense of responsibility when we're parenting. Now, I know you have kids. I don't have human children, but I have fur babies. And I want to say that everyone is a parent at some point in their life, either in their community, in their own families, with animals. We all, at some point in our life, take responsibility for some other thing other than ourselves. Well, I say all, mostly, mostly. So how might that have shown up for you? Having heard
Mm,
Matthew's story and how he gets up at ridiculous o'clock to do his work so that he can then be there for his kids.
mm-hmm. I mean, we can do an entire episode or multiple episodes on parenting. And I
Mm.
do hope we have listeners who want to, become guests on the show to receive some coaching and talk about, their parenting journeys.
Yeah.
But to me, parenting was the biggest growth experience of my life.
Mm.
Who I knew myself as a child, as a teenager, as a young adult, pre having children and becoming a mother, completely like you could never really even imagine how you change and who you become by having a child and by, multiple children and the commitment and the dedication you have to growing them and caring for them and protecting them and teaching them and guiding them and ultimately letting them go. Um, every stage, I'm also a teacher, right? So I really do, I love children and I really respect parents. It's a sacred, sacred job. Um, you know, for me personally, all the ups and downs, you were talking about the roller coaster ride. Um, ups and downs and ups and downs, and there's a saying among parents that you're only as happy as your least happy child, you
Mm.
know, and when someone you love is in deep crisis, um, that has you kind of like your own personal pain, but someone else's pain that you are so committed to, that pain also, you can't ignore it. It brings you flush and present with your life, and becomes the most important thing. And
Mm.
it teaches you what you're made of and how you show up. At one point, I'm not going to go into, you know, other people, like I'll share a little bit without sharing too much because it's my son's story and it's really his to share, not mine. But there was a point at which he was in very serious physical crisis and ended up in the hospital for the better part of 3 months. And I was living in the hospital with him. And, um, that was one of the most challenging periods of my life. I had two other kids at home who I wasn't fully present for, and going back and forth from the hospital to them and trying to manage the household and the bills and have groceries and food for my kids. And are they getting what they need done? And is my son in the hospital getting what he needs done? And I was doing PT and massage and movement with him to try to help rehabilitate him. And um, it was a lot, but like that kind of pain and crisis as a parent also showed me what I was capable of, you know, to be an advocate, to be a cheerleader, to be a really effective multitasker, to figure out how do I also still take care of my health in this situation and not ignore my own need to eat and to sleep and to exercise. I would do laps up and down the stairs in the hospital to get in like cardio, you know? So it taught me a lot. It really did. It taught me a lot. And I've also grown so much from the greatest experiences in my children's lives. Like that's the other side of things is like the joy. And, in Buddhism, there are different kinds of joy. And one type of joy is where you really just are joyful for another person's joy, that their happiness, their success, their flourishing directly like uplifts you. And you get that when you're a parent,
Mm,
right? When you see your children thrive or figure something out for themselves or have their own silliness and their own expression and whatever their achievements are, and you can be a participant in their joy, like it's the greatest thing in the world. So, on the whole human level of everything that's possible, I think children just amplify it, times 1,000. Um, yeah.
mm,
And it's not
yeah,
for everybody. And you know, I have an adult daughter who's looking at whether or not she ever wants to become a mom, and she's really not sure that
yeah,
she wants to commit to being a parent.
yeah.
It's might not be for her. And that's a completely valid choice, and I get it,
Mm.
because once you commit, you can't uncommit to being a
I,
parent.
I had the same thing when I'm going through my life. I always had this knowing inside of me that I wouldn't be a mom of my own children.
Mm,
And I think for a lot of that, I was thinking my mindset was because of the violence that I grew up with, I didn't want to have children to pass that on to them. Um, and this was before I'd done any work on myself. I'd had any
mm,
self-development. I'd studied anything, yogic, spiritual. And I just had that sense that I don't want to pass this trauma on in a lineage, and it needs to stop with me. Would I make a different decision now? I'm not sure, but I do relate to parenthood because I raised my younger brother. He's 10 years younger than me.
yeah.
I raised him when he was little. So he kind of was the child that I had. And then also I have or had two cats, and so my fur babies. And for anyone who is a parent of fur babies, you can probably relate to the fact that yes, they're not human, but they are like your children. And when they're sick and suffering, it's really hard. And there's an added complication because with animals, there's the question of, well, do we euthanize them? Whereas with humans, you don't have to make that decision. It's a very different ball game. So I think being a parent, I agree, teaches us to be selfless. It teaches us commitment. Um, and I think also it's important that we learn about how to put ourselves first, even though we're parents, that we, as you said, take care of our own health. A lot of women call it selfish. The women that I work with, they say, oh, I feel guilty or I feel selfish going off on a weekend and leaving my kids when, especially if one's not sick. And I'll say to them, it's not selfish, it's selfing. We have to
Mm,
put ourselves
mm-hmm,
first. You can't give from an empty cup. So
mm-hmm,
we have to make sure as parents, as responsible citizens, that
yeah,
we put ourselves first, that we practice selfing, where we give our needs emotionally, psychologically, physically, eat well, exercise, even if it's go
mm-hmm,
out for a walk, because that way you're bringing your full cup to your children or the
Yeah.
people you're responsible for. And I think that's the most important thing that we can do as parents to any, whatever we're parenting or
Yeah.
whomever we're
And
parenting.
just having spiritual practice, right? Because spiritual practice
Mm,
nourishes and fills us. When we meditate, when we do our yoga practice, when we pray, when we read wisdom texts that remind us of our true nature, when
mm,
we listen to a podcast that actually is speaking a language of the soul that nurtures us, and then we can come back into our life with the day-to-day stuff that needs to get done, which isn't always glamorous,
mm,
um, and recognize that life living in your life is a spiritual practice.
mm.
It also, very last thing I'll say on this is that, Thich Nhat Hanh is one of my gurus and studied a lot of his work and studied with him, on retreat several times. And one of the things that was most impactful for me in his teaching was that he taught that you can say these little gathas, like these little tiny mantras of intentionality when you're doing anything that doesn't necessarily seem spiritual. Washing my hands. I am so grateful that I have these hands that can be of service in the world and do what needs to be done today. Washing my dishes. I am so grateful that I have the resources to provide food for myself and my family to nourish and keep us healthy. Changing this diaper. I'm so grateful in the moment that my child's bodily processes are working and that they're physically well, right? So you can turn any moment into an opportunity for gratitude, for connecting to what really matters. And a lot of parenting is remembering that, not getting lost in the weeds, but like pulling back and seeing the whole forest and being grateful for the perspective that it all comes back to a soulful calling. Yeah.
I love that. And it's the meta view of life. If you can
Yes.
hold a meta view and be um, less connected or attached to um, our stories of past miseries, what we don't have comparison. And for me, my spiritual practice gives me that benefit because it enables me to look down on my own life and not be so, oh, woe is me about things when things are happening, but have a meta view of I'm blessed and this life is a blessing. And my guru talks about Sri Shakti Amanarayani talks about doing good deeds, giving, forgiving, and serving, and taking care of your family, doing your dharma, living your dharma, which is living a responsible life. And if we hold these spiritual concepts and themes true and close to our heart, then it doesn't change what will happen in our life, but it helps us navigate those things much more easily, with much more calm, with much more clarity, with much more a sense of groundedness. And so I think to wrap up today's episode, I think the real message is, and it's kind of always my message. I know Krishna Das says it at every kirtan that he goes to, or teachers not goes to, or anything that he does. He'll say, just do your bleep practice, just do your
Hmm.
practice, even if
Yeah.
it's 10 minutes. And
Yeah.
you say your practice, your spiritual practice doesn't have to mean sitting down and closing your eyes. It can be through your day to day, your presence awareness, having presence awareness.
Amazing. That's the perfect way to end this conversation because that's really what Matthew brought in his episode is that I just show up and do my practice every day. And then he also talked about how, like, if you see your life as one long day,
Mm,
right? I'm not going to not do my practice in this day.
yeah,
And it's you keep showing up and doing your practice and it does its magic.
mm,
Yeah.
exactly. And on that note, namaste.
Namaste. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Wisdom We Share podcast. We hope today's episode sparked some new insight, imagination, and practical tools you can integrate into your daily life.
Continue this journey with us by subscribing, sharing, and dropping us a review. Until next time, stay wise.